Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Severus Snape is one of the most controversial characters in the Harry Potter universe, but if you only know him from the films, you might be missing a lot. The movie version of Snape is noticeably softer and nobler than the man we meet on the pages of the books. Today I'll show you how the films deliberately smoothed out the edges and turned Snape into a tragic hero, whereas in the books he comes across as much harsher and far more morally ambiguous. Enjoy watching. Number 1. A softer teacher. In both the books and the films, Snape is known for his rudeness. However, the way he treats students is noticeably toned down in the adaptations. He's snarky, clearly favors Slytherin, and humiliates Harry, but it all comes off more like stern schooling rather than true cruelty. Book Snape is a whole different story. He constantly mocks Ron and Hermione, taking jabs at Ron's intellect and Hermione's appearance. He openly bullied Neville, terrifying him so badly that Snape became his boggart. He tried to have Lupin fired, a genuinely good teacher who desperately needed the job. His cruelty went far beyond the boundaries of school discipline. Number 2. A scene that never happened. One of the clearest examples of Snape being sugar-coated on screen is in The Prisoner of Azkaban, where he stands protectively in front of Harry, Hermione and Ron to shield them from werewolf Lupin. It's a heroic moment, except it never happened in the book. In truth, Snape was unconscious during the entire scene, and when he came to, his only concern was capturing Sirius Black. This significant change reshapes our view of Snape, from a man driven by personal grudges in the book to a noble protector in the film. Number 3. James versus Snape. Truth or myth? The films emphasize how James Potter bullied Severus, and yes, James certainly wasn't perfect in his school days, but what the films leave out is that Snape wasn't an innocent victim either. In the books, Snape is shown to be obsessed with the dark arts and frequently insulted others. James even saved his life after Sirius played a dangerous prank on him. Their rivalry was mutual, neither side was innocent. By simplifying this complexity, the films paint Snape more as a victim than he truly was. Number 4. The Lily story, a distorted tragedy. In the 7th film we see an emotional scene. James knocks into Lily, her books fall, Snape helps her pick them up, and in that very moment she looks at James, suggesting that this was the turning point in her drifting away from Snape. It's touching, cinematic, but far from the book's version. In reality, Lily put up with Snape's behavior for a long time, until, in a fit of rage, he called her a mudblood. That was the breaking point. Later, she realized he shared Voldemort's views and cut all ties. The film skips these essential details, replacing them with romanticized subtext to make Snape seem more sympathetic. Number 5. A dark past left untouched. One of the most crucial things, almost entirely, left out of the movies is Snape's real involvement with the Death Eaters. He didn't just join them, he willingly served Voldemort and was the one who reported part of the prophecy which ultimately led to the Potters' deaths. Only after Lily's death did Snape come to Dumbledore, filled with guilt and begging to save her. He didn't care about James or Harry. This is a pivotal moment that shows Snape's complexity and selfishness. He realized the consequences too late. But the films barely mention it. Instead, they frame him as someone who sacrificed everything for love, a hero's image, but one far from the original. Number 6. The omitted scene with Pettigrew. In The Half-Blood Prince, a quiet scene at Malfoy Manor reveals something ugly. Peter Pettigrew, reduced to a snivelling servant, offers Snape a drink. Snape doesn't thank him. He doesn't even look at him. Instead, he commands, "Wormtail the wine," like he's ordering a house elf. Pettigrew rushes to obey, fumbling under the pressure. Snape watches in silence, letting the shame hang in the air. He knows Pettigrew is weak, and he enjoys it. There's no honor in the way he treats him, only dominance. It's not justice, it's bullying. The films leave this out completely. There's no scene of Pettigrew groveling, no glass of wine, no cold orders. Snape never humiliates a fellow Death Eater on screen. Instead, he's shown as distant, calculating, above petty cruelty. But the book tells a different story. Snape's resentment didn't disappear, it just found easier targets. Even among Voldemort's followers, he chose to punish the powerless. It strips away the idea that Snape only hurt those who deserved it. In truth, he hurt whoever wouldn't fight back. Number 7, his attitude toward Harry until the very end. In Deathly Hallows, Snape dies in a pool of blood. His last requests are whispered, "Look at me." It's a haunting moment. Harry watches the man who tormented him take his final breath. Then the memories come, Lily, the promise, the pain. After that, the films paint Snape as a tragic hero, a man who secretly loved, silently protected, and ultimately died for Harry. But the books remember something else. Snape never changed how he treated him. Even in the final year, when Snape becomes headmaster, he still punishes Harry, mocks him, and never once speaks with kindness. "You have your mother's eyes," he says only as he dies, not while the boy was alive to hear it. Snape never grew to love Harry. He didn't try. What he did for Lily, not for James, not for Harry. In Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore tells him the boy must die, Snape is horrified, not for the child's sake, but because you've been raising him like a pig for slaughter. Not the boy, not Harry. To Snape, Harry was always James's son. A painful reminder, a duty, never a person. The films wash this away. They offer redemption without confrontation. But the book never lets you forget. Snape may have died brave, but he never died kind. Number 8, the excluded scene with Ginny. In Half-Blood Prince, during a potions class, Ginny Weasley suffers an accident. Her cauldron erupts and she's injured. Boiling potion splashes onto her hand. She winces, clearly in pain. The room freezes. For a moment, it seems the professor might react with concern. But Snape walks over, takes one look, and says, 5 points from Gryffindor for your clumsiness. He offers no help, no potion, no concern. He simply moves on, leaving Ginny humiliated in front of the class. This scene hits hard because Ginny is not just any student. She's a capable, brave young witch, but to Snape, she's nothing more than a name from the wrong house. His treatment of her isn't just cold, it's cruel. In a school where teachers are guardians as well as instructors, Snape shows no instinct to protect. He punishes pain. That moment lingers. It tells us how far his prejudice extends, not just to Harry, not just to Ron, but to anyone outside his carefully guarded circle of Slytherin favourites. In the films, this never happens. Ginny Weasley is barely noticed by Snape. There's no tension, no insults, no sign of animosity. They barely exchange a glance. The dynamic is erased. Viewers are left with the impression that Snape simply doesn't care either way. His favoritism is invisible. His contempt goes unspoken. It's a clean slate that doesn't match the pages of the book. By removing these details, the films protect him. They dull the blade. A teacher who mocks an injured girl is harder to sympathize with, but a teacher who says little and moves like a shadow, he's easy to admire. Once again, the film sacrifices truth for image. The cruelty disappears. The man becomes myth. Number 9, a shadow over Hermione. One night in Philosopher's Stone, Hermione and Harry are caught sneaking back from Hagrid's. Snape finds them in the corridor and doesn't hesitate. He deducts 50 points from Gryffindor, not 5, not 10, 50, for walking in a hallway. The punishment isn't about rules, it's about humiliation. He looks at them coldly, savouring it. Harry feels the shame instantly, not just for himself, but for the whole house. One man's grudge becomes everyone's burden. Later, in Goblet of Fire, Snape aims cruelty straight at Hermione. When Draco curses her teeth to grow out of control, Snape looks at her, panicked, disfigured, and says, "I see no difference." The classroom laughs. Hermione is frozen. She doesn't cry, but she lowers her gaze. It's not just a joke. It's an adult publicly mocking a child's appearance. And it's not the first time. Snape never hesitates to belittle those who excel, especially when they're not from Slytherin. In the films, none of this exists. The incident with the teeth is gone. The midnight point deduction becomes a minor scolding. Snape barely interacts with Hermione at all. When he does, his sarcasm is dry, not cruel. The sharp edge is gone. What remains is a version of Snape who's cold, yes, but not vicious, not petty, not the man who wounds with words and never looks back. The truth was harder to watch, so the films chose silence. Number 10. The simplified conflict with Sirius. In Order of the Phoenix, the tension between Severus Snape and Sirius Black crackles through every shared scene. It's not just petty dislike, it's hatred forged in childhood and sharpened over years. Snape never forgets the humiliation Sirius once caused him. And Sirius? He still treats Snape like the boy he bullied. Their encounters at Grimmauld Place are filled with venom. "You'd better watch your mouth, Snivellus," Sirius growls. But Snape doesn't flinch. He fires back with surgical precision. "You might be back at headquarters, but you're doing what you've always done. Nothing?" This hostility isn't just words. Snape uses it. When Harry has a vision of Sirius in the Department of Mysteries, he runs to Snape for help. He begs him. But Snape, thinking it's a trick, hesitates. He mocks Harry in front of Umbridge. He's got Padfoot at the place where it's hidden. It's a coded message. Dumbledore would have understood. But Snape does nothing. Whether it was revenge or doubt, his choice cost Sirius his life. He never tried to confirm it, never acted. The weight of that silence is deafening. The films reduce this fire to flickers. A few insults, a glance of irritation. Sirius calls him Snivellus. Snape frowns, and that's it. There's no dinner table tension, no verbal duels, no betrayal. The deep resentment, the chance for Snape to act and not act, gone. What's left is a cold character with no past, a man who doesn't hate, doesn't burn, just exists. But the book doesn't let him hide. Snape is a man trapped in his own anger. He lashes out at Sirius because he can't forgive. Not the pranks, not the past, not the fact that Lily chose someone else. When Sirius dies, Snape doesn't grieve. He doesn't flinch. He wins. And he never says a word. The films paint Snape in grey. The books remind us his heart was still black in places. Number 11. Disregard for children in distress. One of the clearest examples of Snape's indifference towards students outside of Slytherin comes in Half-Blood Prince. Marcus Belby walks into class with a bruise under his eye, visible, painful, and unexplained. Snape doesn't ask what happened. He doesn't investigate. He simply looks at the boy and mutters, "Next time, duck." No concern, no discipline, just a cold remark and a turned back. The classroom moves on as if nothing happened. Belby shrinks into silence. The bruise fades into the background, just like every non-Slytherin in Snape's world. This scene never appears in the films. In fact, film Snape is strangely neutral. He may favour his own house, but he rarely ignores danger. On screen, he appears calculated and sharp, but not neglectful. The filmmakers omit every moment where Snape turns away from students in need. The message is rewritten. Instead of a biased teacher who lets children suffer, Snape becomes a disciplinarian who merely chooses tough love. But the books paint a more disturbing picture. When Neville Longbottom struggles in class, Snape mocks him until he can't speak. When Hermione answers too quickly, he snarls, "You insufferable know-it-all." He doesn't correct with care. He tears down confidence. The pattern is clear. If you're not a Slytherin, Snape will not protect you. He might belittle you, he might humiliate you, but he will never stand between you and real harm. These small moments build a larger truth. Snape's classroom isn't safe for everyone. It's safe for Malfoy, for Nott, for Crabbe and Goyle, but for Seamus, for Neville, for even Harry. Protection is not guaranteed. The films soften this reality, sanding off the edges until the cruelty disappears. But in the books, the children remember, and they flinch when he enters the room. Number 12. Snape and Harry during occlumency. Snape stood at the front of the classroom, his face a mask of cold indifference. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry's occlumency lessons with Professor Snape weren't just difficult, they were humiliating. Snape never explained what Harry was supposed to do. Instead, he barked orders, mocked him, and treated each failure like proof of weakness. "You are just like your father," he sneered more than once. Not only did Snape offer no help, He seemed to want Harry to fail. Each session felt more like punishment than protection from Voldemort. And then came the memory. During one lesson, Snape lost his temper and forcibly broke into Harry's mind. "Legilimens!" he shouted, pushing through Harry's thoughts like smashing glass. Harry wasn't just seeing memories. Snape was invading them. Private moments with his parents, Dudley's bullying, the cupboard under the stairs, moments Harry never shared with anyone. It was a violation, and Snape didn't care. "You're weak," he said. "You will never master your emotions." In the films, this is barely touched. Occlumency is reduced to a few stylized scenes, a blast of magic, a flash of light, Alan Rickman delivering lines in a deep, calm voice. But there is no tension, no fear. The camera doesn't show Harry's panic or Snape's cruelty. There is no moment where Snape tears through Harry's memories of his mother or mocks his feelings. It looks more like a duel between equals than a psychological assault from teacher to student. This change matters. In the book, these lessons are one of the clearest windows into Snape's bitterness and inability to see Harry as anything more than James Potter's son. In the film, the dynamic is softened, nearly noble, but the book shows it as it was, a brutal, toxic experience that left Harry confused, ashamed, and unprepared for the battles ahead. Number 13, redemption out of love or for himself. There is a scene in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows that has become emblematic of Severus Snape's tragic arc. It is the scene in which Harry, placing the last of Snape's memories into the pensieve, tumbles into a lifetime of hidden truths. The image of Snape cradling the lifeless body of Lily Evans, his face contorted in grief, has haunted audiences ever since. In the film, this moment is painted with the brush strokes of a romantic tragedy, a grand tale of love lost and eternal loyalty. But within the book's quieter, harsher prose lies a more uncomfortable truth. Snape's sacrifice was not born of pure altruism. It was not a noble mission to save the world, nor a selfless act for the greater good. It was something smaller, more selfish. It was the desperate attempt of a broken man to redeem himself in the eyes of the only person he had ever truly loved and lost. Snape's story begins not with his betrayal of Lily, but with his slow descent into the ideology that would ultimately cost him her trust. He did not become a Death Eater overnight. It was a gradual surrender to bitterness, rejection, and a desire for power after years of humiliation and poverty. His obsession with the dark arts in school, his alignment with students like Avery and Mulciber, and his participation in their cruelty was not mere posturing. It was a rejection of the world that had rejected him. The irony is that in the process, he severed the one connection that might have saved him, his friendship with Lily Evans. When Snape called her mudblood, it was not just a moment of anger. It was a defining fracture. In the book, his immediate regret is clear, but so is the finality of the break. Lily tells him, "You've chosen your way, I've chosen mine." His apology is met with a cold wall of disappointment. From that point on, everything Snape does is haunted by that moment. He does not attempt to change the world. He does not leave the Death Eaters. He does not warn others. He asks Dumbledore to protect Lily and only Lily. When Snape first comes to Dumbledore, it is not to confess. It is to beg. "Hide them all then," says Dumbledore in the book. "Keep them safe, please." But Snape cuts him off. "Just her, just Lily." He is not moved by justice. He is not burdened by guilt for the death of James or the peril of their infant son. His remorse begins and ends with Lily. That is the truth often softened in adaptation. Snape's initial motivation is not heroism, it is desperation. The woman he loved is in danger because of a prophecy he delivered. And even then he tries to save only her. That detail is essential because it colors everything that follows. Snape's loyalty to Dumbledore, his protection of Harry, and his eventual betrayal of Voldemort are not born of an innate moral compass. They are born of a single, crushing loss and a singular obsession. Snape protects Harry not out of love or even respect, but because Harry is Lily's son. "He has her eyes," he reminds Dumbledore more than once. This is not a symbol of hope, it is a wound that never closes. In truth, Snape resents Harry. He resents the boy's popularity, his resemblance to James, the father Snape loathed, and yet he protects him, endlessly, obsessively. He guides him in secret, places himself in danger, kills Dumbledore on command, and ultimately dies to ensure Voldemort's defeat. But the heart of his motivation remains locked in a single word, whispered as he draws his last breath, always. The films immortalize this as a symbol of undying love, a Shakespearean tragedy, but in the books it is not so simple. Snape's always is not just romantic, it is confessional. It is a word heavy with regret, with what-ifs, with years of watching the son of the woman he failed, all while hiding the ugliness of his own past. Snape never asks for forgiveness. He never seeks to redeem himself publicly. His every sacrifice is cloaked in secrecy, not because he is noble, but because he is ashamed. This shame drives him. He becomes Dumbledore's most valuable spy, not because he believes in the Order's cause, but because it is the only way to make his guilt bearable. "You disgust me," Dumbledore once tells him, upon realizing that Snape still places Lily's life above others. And Snape does not defend himself, he simply bows his head. That moment, often forgotten, reveals a man not redeemed, but broken. Snape does not hate Voldemort for his ideology. He hates him for killing Lily. He does not despise the Death Eaters for their cruelty. He despises himself for becoming one. His story is not about righteousness, it is about penance. He is a man who made the wrong choices and then tried, too late, to make one right. His life becomes an endless punishment, a life of shadows, double lives, and silent suffering. Consider the moment when he discovers that Harry is to die. Dumbledore tells him the truth, that Harry must be sacrificed to defeat Voldemort. Snape is horrified not because of Harry's fate, but because Lily's son will die. "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the proper moment?" he demands. "You have used me." In that instant, his grief erupts. He realizes that even this long path of suffering has not brought Lily back, nor truly honored her memory. He has only become a tool in another war. Even in his noblest moment, he is not free from bitterness. Number 14. Forgotten moments with Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore was never a man to bear all. A master of concealment, his greatness was woven not only from his magical genius, but from his understanding of how much truth the world, or even one boy, could bear. And yet scattered across the tapestry of the books are glimpses into his private world, his regrets and his hard bargains. One such moment, often forgotten or deliberately softened in cinematic retellings, comes not with wands raised, but with whispered words in the darkness, a moment when he strips the illusion from Severus Snape's redemption, revealing the raw, selfish nerve that pulses beneath. The scene occurs in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, and it is not a duel nor a dramatic sacrifice, it is a conversation, a quiet, shattering exchange that punctures the romanticized image of Snape as a selfless protector. Dumbledore, frail and knowing his end is near, listens to Snape's complaints. Snape is weary of shielding Harry, of placing himself in danger, of being caught between the boy and the Dark Lord. Dumbledore listens, and then slices through Snape's bitterness with words that weigh like a verdict. "You do not care, then, about the death of her son?" Snape's reply is a damning silence, and so Dumbledore finishes the thought for him, cutting deeper. "He does not need protection. The Dark Lord has gone. The boy must die. Don't tell me now that you've grown to care for the boy." Still, Snape says nothing, and Dumbledore, with cold finality, declares, "You disgust me." It is this moment that shatters illusions. It's not a moment of heroism. It is not even truly a moment of redemption. It is confession by omission. Snape's silence speaks louder than any plea. He has not been doing all this for Harry. He never loved Harry, never even liked him. His motivation was, and remained, Lily. His love for her, his guilt, and the searing wound of her death compelled him forward, not virtue or moral awakening. The films, however, do not allow this bitterness to settle. They smooth the edges. They present Snape's memories in a poetic montage, accompanied by haunting music and glances of pain. The brutality of Dumbledore's confrontation is gone. In the movie, Snape's final stand is romanticized, always, he says, and audiences sigh. But in the books, always is not a declaration of nobility. It is an admission of obsession. And Dumbledore does not find it beautiful. He finds it tragic and, to a degree, repulsive. This forgotten conversation reveals more about Dumbledore than many readers recall. It shows that he, too, judged Snape not only for his past sins, but for the reasons behind his apparent reformation. Dumbledore was not blindly trusting. He knew that Snape's motivations were flawed, but used them anyway. It is a reminder that even Dumbledore, who orchestrated events from behind the scenes, often with cool detachment, was capable of emotional recoil. Snape is not the only one laid bare in this exchange. Dumbledore himself reveals the ruthlessness of his plan. He is willing to send a boy to his death. He knows Harry must die, and he tells Snape plainly, "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the proper moment?" Snape asks, and Dumbledore replies, "Don't be shocked, Severus. How many men and women have you watched die?" Here we glimpse the burden Dumbledore carries, the lines he has crossed. He is not innocent. He manipulates, sacrifices, and justifies, but he does not lie to himself about it. This dual exposure, Snape's selfishness, Dumbledore's cold strategy, is a moment of brutal clarity. It resists the temptation to grant either man a halo. They are not saints, they are men who have made impossible choices and borne unbearable guilt. Dumbledore does not comfort Snape, he does not absolve him. Instead, he uses Snape's guilt as leverage, securing his loyalty, not through kindness, but through necessity. And here lies the tragedy. Dumbledore does not believe that Snape will ever rise above his guilt. He merely believes that guilt is enough to make him act. Snape's redemption is transactional. He protects Harry not out of compassion, but because the boy carries the last remnants of Lily. Even then, he cannot see beyond Harry's father's eyes. "Look at me," Snape whispers as he dies. He wants to die with Lily's eyes upon him. Not Harry's, not forgiveness, not meaning, just a ghost. This moment also reframes the entire narrative arc of Harry's protection. It was never born out of universal love or duty to a noble cause. It was personal, painfully personal. And yet Dumbledore does not condemn Snape's motives outright. He harnesses them. That is his genius and his tragedy. He uses flawed people for greater purposes, and sometimes they hate him for it. Sometimes they deserve to. It is easy to forget that Dumbledore himself carries a past drenched in regret. His relationship with Grindelwald, the death of his sister, and the ideology he once flirted with all linger in his choices. In Snape, he sees a mirror, a man who once sided with the wrong ideals and now pays penance, not through transformation, but through suffering. But unlike Snape, Dumbledore does not let his past blind him to others. He knows exactly who Harry is. He sees Harry's capacity for love and sacrifice, and that is why Harry must be kept in the dark, because knowledge might weaken his resolve, and Dumbledore cannot risk that. In the books, this is not painted as heroism. Rowling never allows Dumbledore to be fully redeemed. His kindness is real, but his plans are ruthless. His care for Harry is paternal, yet calculated. He gives Harry tools, not comfort. And when Harry eventually walks into death, it is with the understanding that he was raised to die. "You have been raising him like a pig for slaughter," Snape accuses, and Dumbledore does not deny it. Number 15, the final duel with McGonagall. In the climactic moments of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2, a visually striking duel unfolds in the Great Hall of Hogwarts. Flames crackle, spells fly like lightning, and Professor Severus Snape faces off against the indomitable Minerva McGonagall. The audience, tense and captivated, watches as Snape parries spell after spell, never retaliating, only defending. His expression is hard to read, but his reluctance is unmistakable. He leaps through a shattered window of smoke, leaving behind chaos but not destruction. In the language of cinema, this is a symbolic surrender, a veiled gesture of allegiance to the light. It's beautifully choreographed, dramatically poignant, and morally ambiguous. Snape doesn't attack McGonagall, not because he is weak, but because he chooses not to harm her. And when he flees, he does so like a fallen angel vanishing into mist, not a coward retreating from battle. But this is not the story J.K. Rowling told in the book. There, the reality is stripped of glamour. There is no duel, no dramatic confrontation between the two giants of Hogwarts. There is only exposure and flight. When McGonagall challenges Snape in the original text, it's not a battle of equals, it's a reveal. He was not faster than Professor McGonagall, who had whisked around, raising her wand. At once, the torches along the wall flared brighter and dimmed again. The corridor darkened. The castle itself responds to her defiance, not his. Snape is outmatched, and he knows it. He doesn't cast a single aggressive spell. He hurls one spell at the twin Carrows, disarms McGonagall once, and then disappears. No dramatic leap through a stained glass window, just a swift, unceremonious departure. The boy who had once been so full of ambition and darkness now fades, uncelebrated, into the night. The film trades subtlety for grandeur. It paints Snape as a tragic hero whose every move is calculated to protect, not to destroy. His reluctance to fight McGonagall is framed as the culmination of his internal transformation. The duel is cinematic poetry, a visual metaphor that suggests he no longer belongs to the dark side. It gives the viewer comfort, validation that Snape was good all along, that even in retreat he was noble. Yet the book offers no such comfort. It gives us only silence and shadows. Snape's retreat is not interpreted. It is not beautified. It simply is. McGonagall in the book is fire and authority. She doesn't dance with Snape across the hall. She confronts him with sharp efficiency, and the castle listens to her. They looked as though they had never expected to be confronted by Professor McGonagall in full fury. The hallway flares with light. Armor jumps to life. Even the castle resists Snape's presence. This is her domain, not his. There is no question who holds power now. And when Snape vanishes, he leaves not with a bang, but a whimper. He is exposed. He is done. By transforming this encounter into a duel in the movie, the filmmakers shift the emotional weight of the moment. It's no longer about being found out. It's about choosing to leave, sparing harm. This editorial choice elevates Snape's exit into something almost Christ-like. He suffers, he is misunderstood, but he does not retaliate. The audience, unaware of the book's more subdued reality, interprets his flight as self-sacrifice. The truth, however, is more complicated. In Rowling's version, Snape is not afforded the luxury of dramatics. He is simply revealed and dismissed. He does not plead his case. He does not seek redemption in anyone's eyes. He leaves because he must, not because he chooses to. And this shift speaks to a deeper desire, one that haunts every adaptation of a beloved book, the need to redeem, to forgive, to humanize. The film transforms Snape from a morally grey figure into a tragic romantic, misunderstood and honourable to the end. But the book denies this redemption in the moment. It withholds sentimentality. In the novel, the story is not about Snape proving his allegiance. It is about the rebellion finally rising. Snape's exit clears the way for Hogwarts to stand united against Voldemort. There is no room for sentimentality, only strategy. Snape's silent escape in the book underscores his isolation. He is not a part of the Order. He is not embraced by either side. He is a double agent whose cover is blown. His usefulness to Voldemort relies on secrecy, and that is now gone. His survival depends on vanishing. The readers, aware of his deeper motivations, may feel a pang of sympathy. But no character in the castle cheers his exit. No voice calls after him in concern. He is a ghost, present but never fully seen, a figure stitched between worlds, never wholly belonging to either. The film, by contrast, needs closure. It needs the viewer to understand. So it gives us this duel, a moment where Snape's actions become legible. He is not merely retreating, he is resisting, not striking, but shielding. The cinematography tells us this man is not the enemy, and though the book reaches that same conclusion eventually, through memory, through Harry's final understanding, it does so much later. It does not beg us to love Snape in this moment. It asks us only to watch him vanish. The armor in the book leaps to defend McGonagall. They clattered and raised their visors. It's not Snape's magic animating the castle, it's hers. She is the rightful guardian now, and Snape, he doesn't fight for control, he yields it. The symbolic weight of that moment, the shift of power within Hogwarts, is diminished in the film. The duel distracts. It makes it about two people, not the castle, not the collective, not the movement rising against Voldemort. The book sees Snape's flight as the beginning of Hogwarts' rebellion. The film sees it as the end of Snape's ambiguity. Number 16, the distorted scene of Dumbledore's murder. Of all the moments that echo with betrayal and heartbreak in the Harry Potter saga, none resonates with such chilling clarity as the death of Albus Dumbledore. Immortalized in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, this turning point forever changed the tone of the series. But what many fans recall most vividly is not the actual written event in J.K. Rowling's novel, but the dramatized film version, an elegant, almost tragic execution, heavy with silence and slow motion. It's a scene that haunts the viewer, but not in the same way the book unsettles the reader. The cinematic adaptation reshapes the moment, distorting the essence of what really transpired atop the astronomy tower that fateful night. In the film, Severus Snape appears tortured. The camera lingers on his face, where 1,000 emotions seem to wrestle beneath the surface. He hesitates. Dumbledore, already weakened and cornered, pleads not for his life, but for Snape to fulfill a vow. The words, "Severus, please," hang in the air, ambiguous, heartbreaking. When Snape raises his wand and casts Avada Kedavra, there's a brief silence, a solemn finality. Dumbledore falls from the tower like a broken angel. The light dims. It is framed as a necessary evil, a reluctant but noble act. Yet this is not what Rowling wrote. In the book, the moment is stripped of poetic reluctance. There is no theatrical pause, no lingering eye contact framed in moonlight. There is only cold precision. Snape enters the scene swiftly after the Death Eaters. His face is described in stark detail. There was revulsion and hatred etched in the harsh lines of his face. Dumbledore is helpless, disarmed, and entirely vulnerable, a wandless old man facing certain death. When he speaks to Snape, "Severus, please," the line is not one of pleading for mercy, but a coded reminder of a grim promise made long ago. There is no visible inner turmoil in Snape's posture, no hesitation that the reader is invited to witness. And when he casts the curse, he does so with cold efficiency. Avada Kedavra. What makes this passage so disturbing in the novel is the absence of emotion. The reader, like Harry hidden under the invisibility cloak below, sees nothing that would hint at a sacrifice. Instead, Harry is paralyzed, horrified, and confused, watching the man he mistrusts confirm his darkest suspicions. As Rowling writes, Snape raised his wand and pointed it directly at Dumbledore, Avada Kedavra. There is no poetic delay, only action, brutal and final. The narration makes it even more grim by noting Harry's perception of the scene. From his hiding place, Harry sees Snape's expression and is struck by it. There was a look of triumph on his face as he watched Dumbledore fall. That moment is not cinematic. It is not romantic. It is a slap of cold water. For 6 books, Snape had been the most enigmatic character in the series. Bitter, proud, complicated, but in that second, he becomes the villain of the hour. The book doesn't beg for sympathy, it makes the reader sit with the horror. This narrative decision is essential. It is the final misdirection in a long game of shadows. Only later does the truth unravel. The unbreakable vow with Narcissa Malfoy, Dumbledore's terminal curse, the silent pact for mercy and secrecy. But in the moment, Rowling wants us to hate Snape. She gives us no emotional cues to suggest otherwise. The murder is written to shock, to outrage, to grieve. It is an execution, not an act of sorrowful duty. In contrast, the film cannot resist turning it into a scene of martyrdom. Snape is filmed with downcast eyes, wet with unshed tears. The cinematography frames him as a tragic anti-hero, forced into an unbearable choice. It is perhaps a decision driven by Alan Rickman's masterful performance, a portrayal so nuanced, so quietly tormented, that it demands empathy. But it also rewrites the reality of that night. It plants doubt in the viewer's mind when there should be rage. It softens a moment meant to be raw and ugly. Harry's internal monologue during the scene is stripped away in the film. But in the book, his thoughts are frantic and tortured. Trapped by Dumbledore's own enchantment, Harry is forced to watch, powerless to act. He must not be seen, he must not interfere. And so he witnesses the betrayal in full, his heart thudding with confusion. There is no suggestion in his thoughts that Snape is fulfilling a secret promise. In fact, Harry believes that Snape enjoys the act. Snape's face was full of hatred as he gazed at Dumbledore. It is this line that truly shatters the myth of noble sacrifice. What makes the book's version so terrifying is that it removes comfort. There is no softness, no kindness, no music swelling in the background. There is no signal to the reader that this is all part of a plan. It is a clean break in the story, a point of no return. Dumbledore is dead, and Snape is his killer. The rest is mystery. The movie, by contrast, needs resolution. It hints too heavily at the truth too soon. It encourages the audience to read between the lines, to see Snape's pain, to suspect that this may be an act of loyalty. In doing so, it robs the viewer of the very shock Rowling constructed. It undercuts the devastating betrayal with the suggestion of hidden nobility. And while it makes for powerful cinema, it rewrites the emotional architecture of the story. There's also the matter of Dumbledore's agency. In the film, he appears to plead for his life, or at least to hesitate, as though he might have changed his mind. "Severus, please," comes off as a man begging to be spared. But in the book, it is a command cloaked in ambiguity. The words are not a plea for life, but a grim instruction. Fulfill the vow, end it, spare Draco, protect the secret. It is the culmination of a plan formed months earlier, built on trust, sacrifice, and inevitability. Snape does not kill out of fury. He does not act on impulse, nor does he weep for the man he murders. He does it because he must. But Rowling shields this truth behind a veil of horror, so that the reader feels what Harry feels: betrayal, heartbreak, disbelief. Only later does she lift the veil. The film lifts it too soon, which dilutes the emotional payoff in the Deathly Hallows. The aftermath in the novel is equally stark. As Snape flees with the Death Eaters, Harry gives chase. When he finally confronts him, there is no confession, no whispered clues. Snape blocks Harry's spells with brutal ease. "You dare use my own spells against me, Potter?" he snarls. This is not a man racked with guilt. This is a man filled with contempt. His every action shouts of betrayal. The reader has no reason to trust him. Rowling makes sure of that. In the film, even in retreat, Snape is quiet, restrained. He barely engages. He looks back at Hogwarts like a man mourning something he cannot explain. The ambiguity is overwhelming. It invites speculation, but it also undermines Rowling's pacing. Her Snape reveals nothing until the final book. He is a locked box, sealed tight. His secrets are not for sharing. Another striking difference lies in Harry's grief. In the book, it is not just sorrow, it is rage. He screams, he cries, he pounds his fists. He demands answers. Dumbledore's death leaves a vacuum and Harry is consumed by it. He is too angry to think clearly. He sees Snape as the embodiment of all that has gone wrong, and the reader, walking beside him, agrees. The film tempers this rage. Harry is sad, yes. He kneels beside Dumbledore's broken body, tears in his eyes, but the fury is muted. The fire is gone. The scene becomes a quiet eulogy, not a crucible of transformation. The audience mourns, but it does not burn. This divergence matters. Rowling's version is essential to understanding the payoff in the final book. When the truth about Snape is revealed, his love for Lily, his unbroken loyalty, his sacrifice, it hits like thunder. The reader, who once loathed him, must now reconcile that hatred with admiration. It is a betrayal of expectations, just as it was for Harry. That moment only works because of the darkness that precedes it. By portraying Snape as a reluctant savior from the start, the film loses the edge of that reveal. It prepares the viewer for redemption before they've felt the full weight of condemnation. It offers comfort too soon. Rowling's path is harder but more powerful. It asks us to grieve before we understand, to judge before we forgive. It is the braver choice. In truth, the film's version is not wrong, it is simply different. It tells a parallel story, one more palatable, more cinematic. But for those who read the books closely, the original scene remains raw, unsettling, unforgettable. It is not the fall that lingers, but the look on Snape's face as he casts the spell, not of sorrow but of hate. A mask, perhaps, but a convincing one. In that single moment, Rowling made us believe the worst. And only by believing it could we truly appreciate the best. That is the genius of her misdirection and the tragedy of its cinematic distortion. Number 17, missing school memories of cruelty. Severus Snape remains one of the most debated characters in the Harry Potter universe. A man of complexity and contradiction, he inspires fierce loyalty from some fans and deep suspicion from others. Much of this divide stems not only from how he was written in J.K. Rowling's original books, but from how he was interpreted and presented in the films. One crucial omission in the cinematic portrayal of Snape is the complete erasure of his dark school years, the very years that shaped him, twisted him, and perhaps defined his crueler nature. In omitting these details, the films create a sanitized, sorrowful version of Snape that clashes heavily with the grim, dangerous boy described in the books. In the novels, Snape's time at Hogwarts is far from that of a helpless, star-crossed teenager tormented by James Potter. Yes, he was bullied, but he was not merely a victim. He was someone who reveled in the dark arts, who surrounded himself with future Death Eaters, and who actively contributed to an atmosphere of menace. Yet the films choose instead to show him only as the quiet boy who loved Lily Evans, casting him in soft shadows and slow motion with sad eyes and silent pain. It's a powerful visual, but it is not the truth. And when a character's truth is altered to evoke sympathy, the result is a distortion, not just of who he was, but of the story's moral complexity. The most glaring omission is the creation of the spell Sectum Sempra. Introduced in Half-Blood Prince, it is a spell designed to slash the target as though with an invisible sword, leaving them bleeding profusely. It is brutal. Harry uses it unknowingly on Draco Malfoy and is horrified by the results. The spell was written in the margins of an old potions book, annotated by the mysterious Half-Blood Prince. Later, Harry discovers the truth. The prince was Snape himself. He invented the spell. It wasn't just a theoretical exercise, it was a weapon, and a cruel one. That this spell came from a teenage mind, a Hogwarts student, says volumes. But the film reduces this to a fleeting moment, never exploring the darker implications of a boy capable of such violent creativity. Snape in the books is described by Sirius Black as having been fascinated with the dark arts even as a young student. In Order of the Phoenix, Sirius recalls, Snape knew more curses when he arrived at school than half the kids in 7th year. This wasn't a boy who slowly fell into darkness. He had one foot in the shadows from the very beginning. Yet the films provide no context for this. Instead, we see young Severus as a silent figure beneath a tree, watching Lily with longing eyes, shunned by James and his friends. There is no mention of the curses he developed, no sign of the power he wielded as a teenager. More disturbingly, the films completely remove any reference to Snape's friends, boys like Avery and Mulciber, who were known for their cruelty and would later become Death Eaters. In the Goblet of Fire, Karkaroff lists their names while trying to bargain with Dumbledore and avoid Azkaban. Snape's association with these students is not speculative, it is fact. Lily, in a letter preserved in the Deathly Hallows, confronts Snape about it. "You and your friends are awful people. You call everyone of my birth mudblood." She sees through his self-justification. But none of this reaches the screen. In the films, his circle is non-existent. He is isolated and noble in his suffering. In the books, he was part of a group that terrorized others. The omission of these associations erases a major part of Snape's story arc, his flirtation with evil. The narrative in the books makes it clear that Snape was not merely dragged into Voldemort's circle, he chose to walk in. He aligned himself with blood purists, used racial slurs, and cast dark magic. His redemption becomes powerful only because his fall was so deep. But if there is no fall, what does the redemption mean? By removing the worst of Snape, the films rob him of the full weight of his journey. There is also the issue of his cruelty, not just in terms of spell creation or social circles, but in how he treated others. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Snape tells Harry, "You are just like your father, arrogant, strutting." His hatred of James is enduring, but he projects that hatred onto his students. He bullies Neville Longbottom, ridicules Hermione Granger, and openly favors his own house. This behavior didn't emerge out of nowhere. It grew from seeds planted in his youth, seeds never shown in the films. Without those early moments, his later bitterness seems unjustified and, worse, unexplained. Consider the case of Mary MacDonald, a Gryffindor student mentioned in Order of the Phoenix. Lily defends her from Snape's insults, saying he called her a mudblood. This detail is crucial. It shows that Snape was not simply a target of bullying, but that he bullied others himself, using the most vile slurs in the wizarding world. This is the moment that drives a wedge between him and Lily, not the Marauder's behavior. And yet the films gloss over it. The iconic scene where Snape calls Lily a mudblood is shown, but without the full emotional context or his repeated choices to stand by those who shared Voldemort's ideology. It becomes a one-off outburst, not a pattern. Snape's use of the word mudblood is not minor. It is a word that dehumanizes, that equates Muggleborns with filth. To use it, especially as a young man in school, is not just to be angry. It is to declare allegiance with a world view. This was a schoolboy who had already internalized the language of blood purity. The fact that the films never address this beyond a single moment is deeply troubling. They show him regretting the word, but not the belief system behind it. The memory in the Order of the Phoenix, where James bullies Snape by turning him upside down and exposing his underwear, is often cited as the definitive proof that Snape was the victim. But it's only part of the story. In the book, when Sirius and Lupin talk about the memory, they say plainly that Snape gave as good as he got. He was not exactly innocent, Lupin admits, but the films never share this line. The complexity is lost. Snape becomes a martyr in the audience's eyes, not a participant in a toxic school rivalry that hurt both sides. There is also the matter of Snape's obsession with Lily. In the books, it is portrayed as twisted and intense. He calls her a mudblood, joins the Death Eaters, and yet still claims to love her. Dumbledore challenges this love, asking, after all this time? To which Snape responds, always. It is a haunting moment, but in the context of the books, it is also deeply ironic. Snape loved her, yes, but in a way that was selfish, possessive, and filled with bitterness. The films romanticize it, making it seem pure and tragic, but it was in truth deeply problematic. When Snape begs Voldemort to spare Lily, he does not plead for James or for Harry, only Lily. And even this plea is not because he believes in good or innocence, it's because he wants her for himself. When Voldemort refuses, Snape turns to Dumbledore not out of heroism but desperation. His path to redemption begins not from moral clarity but from personal grief. The books show this, the films hint at it, but quickly move back to painting him as a tragic figure undone by love. There is a moment in Deathly Hallows where Harry explores Snape's memories. He sees young Severus watching Lily and Petunia at a playground hiding behind a bush, whispering about their lives. This voyeuristic detail is played as sweet in the film, but in the book it is tinged with unease. Snape was always watching, always lingering on the edge of her life. Even as a child, he struggled to connect in a healthy way. This is not a crime, but it is a trait that adds complexity to his character. The films smooth this over, showing only longing, not obsession. Snape's behavior as a teacher also reflects his inner cruelty. He humiliates students, he bullies Harry relentlessly, he threatens students with poison, he openly mocks Neville and causes his boggart to take the form of Snape himself. This isn't just tough love, it's trauma. And while some of this appears in the films, it is never given context. Without the memory of his own schoolboy darkness, his behavior seems exaggerated. But in the books, it is continuity. A boy who developed dark spells grew into a man who used cruelty as a mask. Even his relationship with Dumbledore is more complex than the films allow. Dumbledore sees Snape for who he is. He does not excuse his past. He simply leverages it for the greater good. When Snape agrees to protect Harry, Dumbledore doesn't praise him. He uses him. It is a relationship based on necessity, not friendship. The films again simplify this. Their interactions become solemn exchanges of trust rather than calculated bargains between flawed men. The real Snape is not Dumbledore's friend. He is his weapon. It is perhaps this very nuance that made Snape's arc so powerful in the books. He was not a hero nor a villain. He was a man shaped by pain, by choices, by hatred, and love tangled into one. He was capable of incredible bravery, but also of appalling cruelty. That is why his story resonates, because it is human. But the films chose a different path. They chose to make him a tragic hero, broken only by love, wronged by others. It is a softer, more palatable tale, but it is also less true. By omitting the cruel schoolboy Snape, the films deny viewers the opportunity to understand how far he came. His redemption becomes less remarkable when it is not preceded by genuine moral failure. We are not shown the boy who created Sectum Sempra. We are not told of his dangerous friends, his slurs, his willingness to hurt others. We are given a shadow, not a man. This choice has consequences. New fans who know only the films defend Snape as misunderstood, pure-hearted, and noble. But book readers know better. They know the boy who flirted with darkness, who stood among monsters, who became one for a time. They know the cost of his decisions and the weight of his regret. That is the Snape who deserves remembrance, not the romanticized ghost wandering film corridors with eyes full of tears. And so we remember the boy who turned his brilliance into blades, who let pain justify cruelty, and who ultimately chose, not easily, but with effort, to turn toward light. His redemption means something because it was not inevitable. It was earned, bitterly and slowly. That is the story the books tell. That is the Snape who matters. Number 18. No criticism from other characters. In the world of the Harry Potter books, Severus Snape was never a clear-cut hero. He was a man wrapped in shadows, a creature of ambiguity, and one whose presence stirred suspicion and division among those around him. Yet, in the film adaptations, much of this complexity is stripped away. The Snape we see on screen is brooding, mysterious, and ultimately noble, rarely challenged or doubted by others. This sanitized image robs us of the rich texture that made his arc so compelling in the novels. In J.K. Rowling's original work, Snape was not only a source of discomfort for Harry and his friends, but also for many adults who had every reason to question his loyalty. Molly Weasley, the warm-hearted matriarch of the Burrow, expressed open concern about Dumbledore's unwavering trust in Snape. Her doubt was not born of petty mistrust, but a mother's instinct for protecting her children, from a man whose past lay entrenched in the ranks of Voldemort's most loyal servants. Tonks, a fiercely loyal member of the Order of the Phoenix, also voiced skepticism about Snape's role. Her wariness reflected the fears shared by many within the Order, particularly after Dumbledore's death, when Snape's apparent betrayal turned suspicion into outrage. In the books, the characters are allowed the space to distrust him, to voice anger and frustration, which amplifies the final revelation of his sacrifice to a tragic and complex crescendo. Even Arthur Weasley, who was known for his calm and forgiving nature, was uneasy about Snape. Arthur, a man who could look past the oddities of muggles and find fascination in mundane plugs and batteries, rarely judged others. Yet even he admitted discomfort regarding the potions master. His words weren't loud, but they carried weight in their restraint, suggesting that even the most open-hearted among the Order struggled to reconcile Snape's cold demeanor with Dumbledore's confidence. Perhaps most significantly, Minerva McGonagall never hid her disdain for Snape. Their interactions were often tense, with McGonagall openly challenging his decisions and authority, particularly when he assumed control of Hogwarts during the Death Eater regime. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when she discovers that he has been headmaster, her fury is tangible. "How dare you stand where he stood?" she says, her voice filled with both pain and indignation. This moment carries emotional weight precisely because the books allow McGonagall to act on her suspicions and deliver judgment based on her own moral compass. None of this nuanced distrust is present in the films. In fact, the cinematic portrayal smooths over the friction, making Snape appear more like a silent guardian than a volatile element within the Order. The filmmakers chose a version of Snape that was easier to sympathize with, whose motivations were hinted at just enough to keep the audience intrigued, but never truly debated by his peers. This creative choice flattens the depth of his character, reducing the friction that made his arc both powerful and contentious. Phileas Flitwick, the gentle and precise charms professor, was shown in the books to be uneasy with Snape's presence at the school, especially after Dumbledore's death. Flitwick's fears were subtle but real, and his protective instincts towards students like Ginny Weasley made his stance clear. His mistrust was never petty. It was the concern of a seasoned educator watching his school fall under dark influence. Rubeus Hagrid, the ever-loyal friend to Dumbledore and a man with a heart larger than his frame, also struggled with Snape's presence. While Hagrid often refrained from condemning others, his hesitations about Snape were evident. He acknowledged that Dumbledore trusted Snape, but even he had moments where he couldn't fully align with that view. After Dumbledore's death, Hagrid's confusion and sorrow were mixed with questions the films gloss over in favor of making Snape's journey more clean-cut. Even Lupin, perhaps the most gentle and forgiving of the Marauders, held bitterness towards Snape, that time never fully erased. In Order of the Phoenix, Lupin's interactions with Snape are strained. Despite their shared history as Hogwarts students, and despite Lupin's mature demeanor, the tension between them is a relic of Snape's past cruelty and his alignment with the darker side of wizarding politics. These grudges were never about childish rivalry. They were scars of real hurt, never fully healed. The most critical aspect that the films erase is the context of Snape's own behavior. His bitterness, his cruelty, and his unkindness were not accidental traits. In the books, Snape was purposefully harsh, at times petty, and often vindictive. He bullied students, played favorites, and wielded his authority with a sharp edge. These flaws were not simply overlooked by others in the novels, they were a source of real conflict. Characters like Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley didn't merely dislike him because he was mean. They resented him for being unjust, for using his power in ways that undermined fairness. The books take time to highlight the complexity of these interpersonal dynamics. Harry's hatred of Snape was not irrational. It was based on years of observation, on the pain of being constantly humiliated and belittled. In Half-Blood Prince, when Snape mocks Harry during their private lessons in occlumency, it isn't portrayed as tough love. It is shown as a deliberate and calculated power play. "You are just like your father," Snape sneers, pouring all his old resentment into a new generation. The absence of these moments in the films robs us of a critical lens. The audience is not encouraged to question Snape. Instead, they are led to admire him as a tormented hero who suffered in silence. The doubt, the accusations, the hostility, all of it is filtered out. The result is a character arc that feels more myth than man. Without opposition, Snape's sacrifice becomes less about redemption and more about destiny. In the books, the question is not simply whether Snape was good or bad, it is whether he was ever capable of love beyond obsession. His treatment of Harry is never softened. He doesn't become a better teacher, he doesn't apologize, he simply follows a path carved by guilt and a desperate need for atonement. And others saw this, they reacted to it, they judged him for it. This web of judgment was critical in painting a full picture of his redemption, one that didn't come cheaply or easily. Even Sirius Black, who had his own flaws, remained one of Snape's staunchest critics. Their mutual loathing wasn't just adolescent bitterness, it was a reflection of incompatible values and unresolved trauma. When Sirius tells Harry, in Order of the Phoenix, the world isn't divided into good people and Death Eaters, it echoes back to Snape in ways few other quotes do. Sirius sees the grey, and he refuses to let Snape slip into the role of unsung hero without resistance. In many ways, the lack of criticism towards Snape in the films makes his eventual reveal less powerful. When Harry learns of Snape's true motives through the pensive, it is shocking. But in the books, it is not just the truth that stuns. It is the undoing of years of hate, the collapse of a structure built from other people's warnings and his own experience. The betrayal Harry feels is not just about being wrong. It's about realizing how many people had also been wrong with him. When Dumbledore defends Snape, it carries more tension in the books because others challenge him. Characters like Molly and McGonagall don't simply nod in agreement, they push back, they demand answers. This friction gives weight to Dumbledore's unwavering stance. It paints his faith as something costly, something that must be constantly defended, and when it is finally justified, it is all the more satisfying. By contrast, the films present Dumbledore's trust in Snape as gospel. Few question it, few oppose it. This leaves viewers with a version of the story that feels strangely devoid of conflict. Snape's dark deeds are not balanced by the voices of those he harmed. His redemption is delivered without cost, and the silence of others becomes a troubling void. What makes literature powerful is not just what it tells us, but how it shows others reacting to the same events. In the case of Snape, Rowling created a world where every character had an opinion, and those opinions painted a mosaic of tension, regret, and reluctant admiration. In removing these opinions, the films simplify what was never meant to be simple. Snape was a man of contradictions. His cruelty was real, his love was obsessive, his loyalty was painful, and the world around him reflected that. The people in the books, students, teachers, friends, enemies, saw the jagged edges and reacted accordingly. Their voices were part of his story. Their mistrust was essential. By muting these voices, the films create a version of Snape that feels airbrushed, polished, and almost saintly. But Snape was never a saint. He was a man, flawed, bitter, brave, and often hard to love. And that is what made him unforgettable. Number 19. Simplified portrayal of Harry's attitude after Snape's death. In the final scene of the movie Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2, Harry stands on the ruined bridge of Hogwarts and speaks a line that feels like the closing of a chapter, not just for the battle just won, but for one of the most mysterious figures in the series. "He was one of the bravest men I ever knew," he says. It's a beautiful sentence, rounded and complete. It places Snape into the pantheon of fallen heroes. It offers closure. But it is, in its cinematic neatness, a simplification. Because in the books, Harry does not arrive at that judgment quickly, nor easily. The road to understanding Severus Snape is longer, thornier, and much more human. The moment Snape dies in the Shrieking Shack is not a moment of redemption. It is a moment of brutality and confusion. Harry witnesses the scene horrified, but he is not ready to forgive. Even after retrieving Snape's memories, Even after seeing the truth of his loyalties, there is no immediate epiphany. The books describe Harry sitting in Dumbledore's office alone, combing through the memories, trying to assemble the story of a man he never truly knew. This scene isn't just informative, it's painful. Harry must confront that his assumptions were wrong, that the man he believed hated him might have been protecting him all along, and also might have been cruel, petty, and biased at the same time. Snape's memories reveal a love so deep it shaped a life, and a bitterness so profound it tainted every part of it. The young Severus calling Lily a mud-blood in a moment of fury was not merely a slip of the tongue. It was the shattering of a bond. And yet he asked Dumbledore to protect her. When she died, he chose to protect her son, not out of love for the boy, but out of guilt, duty, and a tortured kind of atonement. In the book, this complexity is not resolved in a single line. It is left for the reader to grapple with. As Dumbledore says to Snape in The Prince's Tale, "You disgust me," and Snape, haunted but determined, replies only, "Just hide them all." Harry doesn't tell Ron or Hermione everything he sees in the Pensieve. He doesn't rush to announce Snape's heroism to the world. There is no public vindication, there is silence, reflection. He carries the truth quietly. The only hint of reconciliation is years later when he names his son Albus Severus. Even then in the book this naming feels weightier, more uncertain. It's not just tribute, it's a recognition of something too large and painful to fully grasp. It's Harry trying to understand someone who was never kind to him, but who gave everything for a cause neither of them fully chose. The films, in contrast, condense all this inner turmoil into a few elegant scenes. Alan Rickman's performance is extraordinary, and the montage of Snape's memories is moving, but it is also too neat. The cruelty of Snape toward Neville, toward Hermione, toward Harry himself, these are left hanging in the background unresolved. His blatant favoritism for Slytherin, his contempt for students who did not meet his standards, these things are not addressed. Instead, the narrative veers toward instant redemption. A man misunderstood, a martyr in disguise. But Snape was not simply misunderstood, he was understood too well. Harry knew the sting of Snape's sarcasm, the weight of his unfair punishments, the constant reminder that he was not his father. When Harry says in the book, "The Order of the Phoenix," Snape's the reason Sirius is dead, it is not a baseless accusation. It is the voice of someone who has been hurt deeply and who has seen others hurt too. The reader is not asked to forget that. We are asked to hold both truths in our minds, that Snape was brave and that he was often unkind. The scene where Snape duels Professor McGonagall is particularly telling. In the movie, it's played as a moment of tension, then a sudden escape. In the book, McGonagall drives Snape out with ferocious determination. She has no doubt at that point that he is aligned with Voldemort, and Harry, watching from beneath the invisibility cloak, feels a surge of vindication. He has hated Snape for years, and now the world seems to agree. But the twist, of course, comes later. Snape wasn't fighting her. He was deflecting her spells, protecting the students from her counterattacks, and disappearing not in retreat, but in obedience to the larger plan. And yet even with all that, the books refuse to let the reader feel easy. They don't crown Snape a saint, they don't cleanse him of his past. Instead, they show that heroism can live beside cruelty, that love can be selfish, and that redemption may not come with applause. Rowling lets Harry arrive at his judgment slowly. There is no speech, no grand reveal, just a boy who has grown into a man who looks at a life not fully understood and chooses to honor it in the quietest way he knows. Take, for instance, Snape's treatment of Neville Longbottom. In the Goblet of Fire, Snape threatens to poison Neville's toad. In the Order of the Phoenix, he deducts points from Gryffindor arbitrarily, mocks Neville's abilities, and fuels his insecurities. Neville, later a war hero in his own right, confesses to Harry that Snape was his greatest fear, not a Death Eater, not Voldemort. And yet Snape, in his own way, was fighting for the same side. This dissonance is not something the movies dwell on, but the books do, because they understand that true complexity lives in contradiction. Similarly, Snape's animosity toward Hermione, calling her an insufferable know-it-all in front of the entire class, is not erased by the revelation of his secret mission. Nor is his open disdain for Remus Lupin, his cruel joy at exposing Lupin's lycanthropy to the world, ever truly addressed. These actions are not the signs of a saint. They are the scars of a man twisted by bitterness, resentment, and isolation. And yet he protects the students. He shields them when he can. He kills Dumbledore at Dumbledore's own request, weeping as he does it. The single most powerful moment in the book, perhaps the entire series, is the scene in The Prince's Tale when Dumbledore realizes Snape's love for Lily is not a passing emotion, but the defining pain of his life. Dumbledore, upon seeing that Snape still loves her after all these years, after her marriage to James, after her death, asks quietly, "After all this time?" And Snape's answer, always, has become iconic. But even this does not wash away his faults. It is not meant to. It is a window into a soul, not a seal of sainthood. Harry himself recognizes this. In the final book, he wrestles with the implications of what he's learned. He sees that Dumbledore manipulated many people, including Snape. That Snape, though often cruel, was also exploited, used as a pawn. That the adults around him were not always wise, not always good. Harry's maturity lies in how he processes this, not with anger or rejection, but with a slow acceptance that people are not simple, that truth is layered, and that sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to try to understand them. That's why the book does not end with a sweeping proclamation. When Harry names his son Albus Severus, it is not just a tribute, it is a legacy wrapped in contradiction. He tells his son, "You were named after 2 headmasters of Hogwarts. One of them was a Slytherin, and he was probably the bravest man I ever knew." Even here, the word probably lingers. It leaves room for doubt, for re-evaluation. It respects the truth that Snape's story was not one of black and white. The films, however, do not dwell in doubt. They simplify. The flashback sequence is a flood of emotion, and rightly so, but it is also a tidy answer to a question that should remain open. Was Snape a hero? Yes. Was he a villain? Sometimes. Was he a victim? Often. Was he a bully? Undeniably. And was he, in the end, someone who made a choice to stand against evil at great cost to himself? Absolutely. But none of these truths cancel out the others. They coexist, and that is what makes his story so powerful. By smoothing Snape's arc into a single noble gesture, the films deny the audience the richness of his character. They strip away the moral ambiguity that makes him one of the most compelling figures in the series. In doing so, they also rob Harry of his own growth, because Harry's journey to understanding Snape mirrors the reader's own. It is not about instant forgiveness. It is about learning that people are complicated, that courage does not always come with kindness, and that love can be both redemptive and ruinous. In the end, Snape's legacy is not the silver doe or the memory of a lost love. It is the uneasy feeling he leaves behind, the questions he forces us to ask. Would we have made his choices? Could we have borne his burdens? And are we willing to admit that a man can be both savior and tormentor, both cruel and courageous? In Deathly Hallows, Harry enters the Forbidden Forest ready to die. He sees the path clearly now. He understands sacrifice not because someone told him what it means, but because he has seen it, lived it. Snape was part of that lesson, not through his words, but through his silence, through the choices he made in the shadows, and through the pain he never stopped carrying. So when Harry says he was one of the bravest men I ever knew, it means something very different in the book than it does on screen. It is not a statement of clarity. It is an admission of struggle. It is not a line of closure. It is a line of understanding, earned, not given. And perhaps that is the greatest tribute of all. Number 20, idealized physical appearance. There's a striking contradiction nestled within the legacy of Severus Snape, one that lies not in his choices, his loyalties, or even his morality, but in something far more superficial: his appearance. As depicted in the Harry Potter films, Snape became an icon of Gothic charisma. Alan Rickman's performance transformed the character into a tragic anti-hero draped in black elegance, moving like a spectre of nobility through the dim corridors of Hogwarts. His voice, measured, cool and rich with meaning, lingered like a velvet fog. His presence, tall and composed, demanded attention and, oddly enough, affection. But this was a portrayal filtered through the lens of cinema, where shadows are polished and grim figures are made strangely seductive. The man on screen was not the man on the page. In J.K. Rowling's original vision, Snape is not described in even remotely flattering terms. The very first time Harry lays eyes on him in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling writes, he had sallow skin, a hooked nose, and greasy, shoulder-length black hair. These details aren't arbitrary, they are deliberate tools of literary characterization. Sallow, hooked, greasy, words that coat the imagination in discomfort. From the outset, Snape is supposed to unnerve. He is not handsome, not majestic, not appealing in the way Rickman's Snape eventually became for millions of fans. He is, in fact, physically repellent. The difference is profound, not because beauty or lack thereof defines a character's worth, but because it colors the audience's emotional response. In the films, Snape's allure becomes part of the myth. His long black robes flow with gravitas, not grime. His stare is intense, not sinister. His presence feels magnetic, not revolting. He is, quite literally, too attractive to be hated in the way the books intended. The very physicality of the role alters the lens through which viewers judge him. This transformation isn't merely about casting. Alan Rickman, an accomplished actor known for his commanding presence, inevitably imbued Snape with a dignity the books never assigned him. When Rickman first appears in the Great Hall in the Philosopher's Stone, his slow, purposeful stride, the subtle arch of his brows, the way the students fall silent. It builds an image of control, not malevolence. The camera lingers on him like it would on a misunderstood king, not a bitter, grudge-holding schoolmaster. It's easy to see why so many fans began to reinterpret Snape as a tragic romantic, rather than a deeply flawed human being. This romanticization extends to the fandom's perception. Online, countless edits and fan art portray Snape as a brooding figure, akin to a Victorian Byronic hero, dark, tortured, misunderstood, and noble beneath it all. It's an aesthetic born not of Rowling's text, but of cinema's seductive reimagination. The book's description of greasy black hair and sallow skin disappears, replaced by slick styling and dramatic lighting. In fan fiction, he is often cast as the brooding lover, the guardian angel, the secret heartthrob. None of this is accidental. It stems from the idealized visual portrayal. In the books, students are frightened of Snape. He commands obedience not through charisma, but through fear. He sneers, insults, and mocks. He plays favorites, and he bullies children. Neville Longbottom, in particular, is emotionally shattered by Snape's treatment. The boggart scene in The Prisoner of Azkaban is telling. Neville's greatest fear is not Voldemort or a Death Eater, but Professor Snape. The boggart morphs into Snape himself, dressed in his grandmother's clothes, as a means of comic relief, but the fear it originates from is very real. That fear in the books is driven as much by Snape's personality as by his grim, off-putting appearance. Yet when fans watch the films, the same figure who humiliated Neville and publicly humiliated Hermione Granger, calling her an insufferable know-it-all in front of the entire class, is interpreted not as cruel but misunderstood. Why? Because Alan Rickman's Snape does not look like someone who would be mean for the sake of it. He looks like someone carrying the weight of the world. His beauty shields him from moral scrutiny. Rowling did not create Snape to be a Gothic prince. His ugliness is part of his narrative function. He is the man who was never loved, never celebrated, never chosen. Lily chose James, the handsome boy with tousled hair and easy charm. Snape, with his dark obsession and greasy exterior, was left in the shadows. His bitterness grows not in a vacuum, but in a life that never gave him the things he most wanted. He is, at heart, a cautionary tale about what happens when pain curdles into cruelty. The audience is not meant to be infatuated with him. And yet, the films whisper another story. When Snape dies in the Deathly Hallows Part 2, the camera lingers on Rickman's face as he looks into Harry's eyes. The scene is drenched in tragic poetry. "Look at me," he says, with blood pooling beneath him. It is a moment designed to break hearts. The book version, however, is not quite so cinematic. The description is sparse, even uncomfortable. "The green eyes found the black," Rowling writes, but after a second, something in the depths of the dark pair seemed to vanish. There is no romantic lighting, no slow pan, no music, swell. Just death and ambiguity. In making Snape beautiful, the films altered how we understand his motivations. The audience became willing to forgive more because the pain looked noble. But Snape's pain was not always noble. It was petty, vengeful, and often directed at innocent children. He tormented Harry not simply because he resembled James, but because he symbolized everything Snape had lost. His love for Lily, while profound, became an excuse to inflict suffering on her son. And still, because Rickman wore his grief like a king's robe, audiences forgave him with ease. Even Harry forgives him more cleanly in the films than he does in the books. In the novel The Deathly Hallows, Harry names his son Albus Severus not with swelling pride, but with a sort of resigned respect. "He was the bravest man I ever knew," Harry says. It is a statement filled with complexity, not affection. In contrast, the film presents the moment with tenderness, reinforcing Snape's image as a fallen hero. The nuance of reluctant admiration is lost beneath the shimmer of cinematic pathos. The discrepancy goes deeper when we examine how appearance shapes authority. In the books, Snape is mocked behind his back. Fred and George call him Snivelus. Students speak of him with loathing. The fear he commands is never tinged with fascination. In the films, even his enemies speak of him with a strange reverence. His authority is unchallenged, his dominance uncontested. His intelligence becomes sleek, not severe. His danger becomes seductive, not grotesque. This transformation distorts the story's moral compass. When appearance aligns with sympathy and ugliness is edited away, the audience stops questioning the underlying ethics. Snape's decision to protect Harry is no longer complicated. It becomes a noble redemption arc. But the reality in the books is far more morally tangled. He protects Harry because of Lily. Not for Harry's sake, not for justice, not even for repentance. Love in Snape's case is possessive, his grief is obsessive, yet none of this sticks when the vessel of that grief looks like a tragic saint. The novel portrays a man at war with himself, and not in an attractive way. Snape's skin is unhealthy, his teeth yellow, his hair unwashed. He broods in corners and lashes out unpredictably. Even Dumbledore, who trusts him, handles Snape like a volatile element. The reader is supposed to feel unsure. Is this man a hero, a villain, something in between? But with Rickman's Snape, the question almost never arises. The answer is written in the soft lighting and elegant costuming. By romanticizing Snape's appearance, the films robbed him of his edge. They turned a painful, disturbing character study into something beautiful. But some stories are meant to be ugly. Snape's story was one of those. It was a warning, not a lullaby, a reminder of how bitterness ruins the soul, how love, when warped, can become cruelty, how one bad decision left to rot can corrode everything, and most importantly, how people can do the right thing for the wrong reasons. And so, while we may always admire Rickman's masterful performance because it truly was masterful, we must also remember that it was not Snape as Rowling wrote him, it was Snape as cinema wanted him to be, sharpened, cleaned, and draped in myth. The Snape of the books was not a prince in mourning. He was a man who chose vengeance over growth, punishment over forgiveness, and obsession over peace. A man who, despite his heroism, never became whole. Let us not confuse compelling with good. Let us not mistake Gothic beauty for moral redemption. Let us remember that in the end, Snape was a deeply human figure, flawed, angry, and hard to look at. And that, perhaps, is what made him unforgettable. Number 21. Silence about cowardice in his youth. The image of Severus Snape, carefully sculpted in the films, presents a man of steel will, haunted by grief, hardened by tragedy, and ultimately redeemed through his unshakable loyalty. But in this portrayal, one essential truth fades into shadow. Snape's youth was not marked by defiance or leadership, but by conformity, fear, and cowardice. The books do not shy away from this reality. His involvement with future Death Eaters was not a reflection of ideology, but of survival instincts. This is a truth the films refuse to tell. That Snape was not a brave young man, but a frightened one. And it is in this silence that we lose the essence of his transformation. From the first time readers are given a glimpse into Snape's school days, it is clear he was never the bold, cunning Slytherin the movies later suggest. In the Order of the Phoenix, during Harry's foray into Snape's memories, the truth is laid bare. The teenage Severus is pale, thin, and awkward, a social outsider who found refuge among a dangerous crowd, not because he admired them, but because they offered protection. He gravitated toward the darker elements of Slytherin House because he had nowhere else to go. It was not ambition that drew him in, it was fear. Evan Rosier, Mulciber, and Avery, and these names echo through the pages of the series as shadows of the future. These were not boys who played at mischief, they were cruel, and even in youth their allegiance to the dark arts was clear. Yet Snape fell into step behind them, not ahead. As Sirius Black once said, Snape's always been fascinated by the dark arts. He was up to his eyes in some very dark stuff at school. But what Sirius misunderstood, and what Harry failed to grasp until much later, was that Snape's fascination was rooted less in ideology than in desperation. He aligned with the strong to avoid being prey. In the pivotal moment when James Potter humiliates Snape during the OWLs, a scene that the films sanitize and reduce, we witness not only the cruelty of James, but the helplessness of Snape. His rage is real, his bitterness justified, but his reaction, lashing out at Lily Evans, betrays a deeper truth. Snape, when cornered, does not rise above. He attacks the only person who showed him kindness. This act, calling her mudblood, is not born of hatred, but of shame and weakness, and this moment defines the pattern of his youth, fear masquerading as hostility. It is important to understand that the word mudblood was not simply an insult, it was a declaration of allegiance. In that instant, Snape confirmed the suspicions of those who questioned his loyalties. He chose the language of his protectors, Rosier, Mulciber, because he feared losing them. The price was Lily, the cost was his conscience, and it was a choice born of cowardice, not conviction. The films erase this moment's weight. They do not show Snape, cornered and humiliated, desperately clinging to the only armor he has left, the ideology of the oppressors. They choose, instead, to depict him as quietly tormented, a misunderstood anti-hero shaped by a single lost love. But the book's Snape is more complex. He is the product of fear, social rejection, and internalized self-loathing. His story is not about unwavering loyalty, but about how guilt can drive a man to become something greater than his cowardice. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore explicitly challenges Snape's past. "You disgust me," he says, upon learning of Snape's role in the prophecy that led to Lily's death. This is not the voice of a man speaking to a noble follower, but to one whose motivations were tainted. Snape did not run to Dumbledore out of repentance. He ran because he had nowhere else to go. The Dark Lord had marked Lily for death, and Snape's panic was that of a man realizing his choices were not theoretical anymore. They were fatal. There's a telling line in the Deathly Hallows when Phineas Nigellus Black refers to Snape as the bravest man I ever knew. And yet this quote, so often used to justify the film's image of Snape, refers not to his youth, but to the man he became after Lily's death. It is bravery through penance. It is not innate. Snape had to earn courage, painfully, over years. It was not part of his teenage identity. That identity was shaped by the walls of a broken home, a school that failed him, and companions who scared him. The books subtly highlight this in Snape's relationships. He is never at ease with others. Even among Death Eaters, he is not popular. He is tolerated. Lucius Malfoy never truly respects him. Bellatrix Lestrange openly questions his loyalties. Voldemort uses him, never trusts him. And this mirrors his school days. Rosier and Mulciber were not friends. They were people Snape followed, hoping not to be abandoned. He never led, he never inspired, he survived. In the Goblet of Fire, Sirius again reflects on Snape's past, saying, Snape knew more curses when he arrived at school than half the kids in 7th year. But knowledge does not equal courage. Snape's mastery of the dark arts was his armor, not his weapon. It was his way of building a fortress around himself, hoping that if he was dangerous enough, no one would hurt him. But it is fear that drives the desire to become untouchable, not strength. The film's portrayal of teenage Snape is almost non-existent, and when it appears, it is sanitized. The viewer is shown a quiet, brooding boy, misunderstood, isolated, yet noble. But where is the scene of Snape sulking behind Rosier's shoulder as Rosier hexes a younger student? Where is the discomfort on Snape's face as he laughs too hard at Avery's cruelty, trying to prove he belongs? These images live in the pages, not the screen. And their absence distorts his arc. Even his nickname, the Half-Blood Prince, reveals more than the films allow. It is not a name of pride, it is an escape. From his muggle father, from his shame, from his powerless self. The persona is an attempt to rewrite his identity, to invent a version of himself that is not afraid, not poor, not humiliated. But it is a mask, not a truth. And only in the books do we see the cracks in that mask. The silence of the films does a disservice not only to Snape, but to the complexity of adolescence itself. In showing him only as brave, they deny the painful truth that courage is often born from shame. Snape's cowardice is not a flaw to condemn. It is the very foundation of his redemption, because only those who have been afraid can choose to be brave. And Snape, more than most, knew fear. J.K. Rowling's text never asks the reader to admire teenage Snape. It asks us to understand him, to see a boy who was lost, who made terrible choices, and who later tried, not always, gracefully, to atone. The films, in contrast, seek to absolve him by omission. By erasing the fear, they erase the struggle, and by erasing the struggle, they make his redemption feel effortless, when in truth it was earned in agony. One of the most revealing moments comes late in the Deathly Hallows as Harry reviews Snape's memories. He watches as Dumbledore demands Snape protect Harry not for his own sake, but for Lily's. "You disgust me," Dumbledore says again. But Snape accepts this judgment. He does not deny it, he does not argue, because he knows it's true. He had been a coward. And it is only in acknowledging that cowardice that he finds a path to heroism. It is tempting to believe that heroes are born brave, but Severus Snape shows us that sometimes they are made from the ruins of their own weakness. His story is not inspiring because he was always noble. It is inspiring because he wasn't. And this nuance, this humanity, is buried in the films under layers of cinematic polish. If Snape's youth had been portrayed honestly on screen, if we had seen the fear in his eyes, the moments he looked away instead of stepping in, the times he chose cruelty to avoid being targeted, then his final acts would have carried even more weight. Because we would have known what they cost him. We would have seen the full arc. From cowardice to sacrifice, the books do not excuse Snape's early behavior. They expose it. They present a deeply flawed young man trapped by circumstance and fear who ultimately fights to become better. That is the story that deserved to be told, not the tale of a cold, misunderstood genius, but of a frightened boy who chose the wrong path and spent a lifetime trying to walk back. Severus Snape's courage is real, but it is hard-won and deeply tragic. It begins not in a grand moment, but in a quiet one, a whispered apology, a broken promise, a desperate plea to protect what he once failed. That is the Snape of the books, not perfect, not proud, but painfully, profoundly human. Number 22. Lack of deeper analysis of his teaching failures. There is a silence in the dungeon, thick and oppressive, as if the stone walls themselves conspire to swallow any breath of ease. The students sit stiffly, eyes forward, ink barely daring to scratch the parchment. Professor Severus Snape, tall, black-robed and gliding like a shadow, surveys his class with eyes colder than the potion bottles on the shelves. This is not a place of learning, it is a crucible of fear. And yet, in the films, this fear is but a theatrical mist, an atmospheric touch, a dramatic flair. The true weight of Snape's classroom, a place that broke rather than built, never makes it to the screen. The films, ever eager to preserve Snape's air of enigmatic power, blur the line between sternness and cruelty. What is shown is a teacher with a commanding presence, one who might be harsh, yes, but seemingly competent, perhaps even misunderstood. But the books tell a grimmer tale. They reveal a man who wielded his authority not to educate, but to belittle, not to guide, but to control. His lessons were not crafted to enlighten, they were constructed to intimidate. His target was never just the potion, it was often the student themselves. Take, for instance, his treatment of Neville Longbottom. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Snape tells Lupin, "Possibly no student has ever been worse at potions than Longbottom." This is not mere criticism, it is humiliation. He mocks Neville's fear, exploits it, and turns it into a running joke. He even suggests feeding Neville's pet to a creature to test if his potion works. "I see no difference," he says when comparing Trevor, Neville's toad, to a potion ingredient. This casual cruelty is not discipline, it is degradation. Neville, already a boy plagued by anxiety, becomes a bundle of nerves in Snape's presence. How many talents withered under that same gaze? And Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, did not escape unscathed. In the Philosopher's Stone, Snape dismisses her enthusiasm and belittles her intellect with scathing sarcasm. "What is the difference, Potter, between monkshood and wolfsbane?" he asks, knowing full well Harry would not know. Hermione raises her hand, desperate to answer, desperate to learn. Snape ignores her, he ridicules Harry instead. Clearly, fame isn't everything. This isn't clever teaching, it's weaponizing ignorance, punishing curiosity, and fostering resentment between peers. Snape's favoritism towards Slytherins was not subtle, and it wasn't harmless. Draco Malfoy, his house's pride, was protected like a prince, regardless of his behavior. In the Order of the Phoenix, Draco openly insults students, mocks Hagrid, and bullies others. Snape remains indifferent. When Ron and Harry respond, they are punished. Detention, point deductions. Snape's classroom was a stage where injustice played out daily, and no one dared challenge the script. One must remember that the role of a teacher at Hogwarts extended beyond content delivery. It was about shaping minds, nurturing resilience, and building character. Snape did the opposite. He dismantled confidence with clinical precision. Dean Thomas, Seamus Finnegan, even Lavender Brown, students whose names rarely surface in film, were among those who bore the brunt of his disdain simply by not being Slytherins. Snape didn't just have favourites. He had victims. His refusal to answer questions was more than a quirk. It was sabotage. In The Half-Blood Prince, Harry notes how Snape rarely explains instructions clearly. Mistakes are not corrected, they are punished. Questions are not welcomed, they are mocked. It is as though the lesson exists solely for the teacher's benefit. Students must guess what he wants, and heaven help the one who guesses wrong. This is not education. This is trial by fire, with the flames stoked by scorn. Even when students attempted to rise above the dread, Snape ensured they stayed grounded in fear. Parvati Patil, during a class disrupted by a boggart, is laughed at and dismissed by Snape for her fears. In that moment, he teaches his students not to confront their emotions, but to hide them. Vulnerability becomes a weakness to be exploited, not an aspect of growth. The lesson beneath the lesson was always the same: fear me, not the subject. His grading was another form of tyranny. In The Goblet of Fire, Hermione receives lower marks from Snape despite performing flawlessly. "No one can brew that potion better than me," she tells Harry, bewildered. It was not about accuracy. It was about power. Snape controlled marks like he controlled attention, distributing them according to allegiance, not merit. What message does this send to a young mind? That effort is meaningless, that fairness is a myth, and that only submission is rewarded. And then there's Harry, the boy Snape swore to protect, and yet the boy he seemed to loathe most openly. His hatred for James Potter blinded him to Harry's needs. "You are just like your father," he spat in, the Order of the Phoenix. But Harry was not. And Snape never cared to know. Instead of mentorship, Harry received cruelty. Instead of guidance, suspicion. Snape never once acknowledged Harry's strengths. Even when Harry succeeded, it was met with silence or derision. A teacher unwilling to see growth in a student is not a teacher at all. But in the films, these moments are shadows at best, brief flashes of stern remarks or dramatic pauses. Alan Rickman's performance, though masterful, gave Snape an aura of tragic dignity that diluted his day-to-day toxicity. His scenes were often shot with low lighting, somber music, and close-ups that suggested inner turmoil. But the camera never showed the shattered confidence of a child leaving his classroom. It never lingered on the quiet tears of a student who felt worthless because of a teacher's words. Even his redemption arc, powerful as it was, should not absolve his failures in the classroom. Being brave, being loyal to Lily, even dying with honor, these do not erase the years he spent tormenting children. A good man might make bad choices, but Snape made bad choices daily, in small, venomous doses, for years. The films ask us to admire his sacrifice, but they do not ask us to account for the damage he inflicted along the way. Consider Luna Lovegood, dreamy, intelligent, deeply kind. Her first few years at Hogwarts overlapped with Snape's tenure. Though the books never detail direct encounters, it is hard to imagine her escaping his disdain. Her open curiosity, her oddities, traits Snape despised. What lessons did she miss? What parts of her were dimmed in his presence? The tragedy lies not in what we read, but in what we must infer. The quieter students, the softer voices were likely the most bruised. And let us not forget that Snape, for all his intelligence, never inspired. Students did not leave his classroom filled with awe or excitement. They left exhausted, dreading the next session. No Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, or Ravenclaw ever spoke of him with admiration. They feared him, survived him. Even those who were gifted in potions found their abilities stunted under his gaze. Learning under Snape was a war of attrition. He taught through silence and shame. He ignored hands raised in eagerness, favored failure over feedback, and built a culture of secrecy and suspicion. He did not foster discussion. He stifled it. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Justin Finch-Fletchley tries to ask about a brewing error, Snape cuts him off with a sneer. If you had been paying attention, you wouldn't need to ask. This is not discipline. It is dismissal. How many students stopped asking questions that day? The difference between discipline and destruction is intent. McGonagall was strict, too, sharp, precise, commanding, but her students respected her. They improved under her. Even when she scolded, it came with a sense of fairness. Snape lacked that balance. His punishments were personal, his corrections humiliating. He did not correct to build, he corrected to control, and the damage lingered. And so we must ask, what kind of legacy does a teacher leave behind? Not the headlines, not the tales of bravery, but the faces of those he taught. For Snape, many of those faces were marked by dread. The films, in their haste to sculpt him into a tragic hero, chose to ignore this truth. They show his potions lessons with theatrical precision, cauldrons bubbling, robes flowing, but not the broken confidence left in their wake. Education at Hogwarts was never perfect, but Snape's room was an outlier of cruelty. And it is telling that after his death there was no memory of fondness from his students. No one spoke of a lesson that changed them, or a moment of insight. His classroom did not echo with inspiration. It echoed with silence. That is the failure the films refused to show. And perhaps had the films dared to explore this side of him more deeply, the redemption would have rung louder. For a man who caused pain to then choose protection, that is true transformation. But without the full picture of his cruelty, his final sacrifice feels less like a turning point and more like a twist. The cost of his teaching is lost in shadows, and so is the full scope of his redemption. A great teacher is remembered not just for what they know, but for how they make students feel. Snape, in the books, made many feel small. That truth, uncomfortable as it is, deserves its place alongside his bravery. Without it, the portrait is incomplete. Number 23, erased line of betrayal toward Dumbledore. When Severus Snape turned to Albus Dumbledore and cried out, "You have used me," readers who followed the books knew that the betrayal had happened long before this outburst. The moment is presented in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows as a sudden explosion of emotion, a breaking point where Snape, after learning that Harry must die, finally expresses moral revulsion. The film adaptation turns it into a moment of authenticity, a sign that Snape has a conscience, that he is the only one horrified by the cruel machinery of the plan. But this is a lie, a cinematic softening. In truth, the books paint a much colder picture. Snape knew everything. He had agreed. And his protest came not from discovery, but from performance. The line, "You have kept him alive so he can die at the right moment," is not the cry of a man blindsided. It is the cry of a man who has, for years, carried the secret burden of a sacrificial lamb and is now choosing to feign outrage, perhaps to soothe his own guilt, perhaps to lash out at the only person he truly served, Dumbledore. The movie simplifies it. It edits out Snape's prior knowledge as though it were irrelevant, and in doing so it rewrites the moral architecture of the entire story. It gives Snape a clearer conscience and Dumbledore less blood on his hands. In the book, the betrayal is layered and stretches across years. It is not a single moment, but a strategy of manipulation. Dumbledore orchestrates Harry's life as if it were a symphony in which every note must lead to a single, fatal crescendo. He feeds Harry bits of information, guides him towards sacrifice, yet withholds the final, most devastating truth. Not because Harry cannot understand it, but because Harry's loyalty depends on ignorance. The boy must not know his purpose until the very end. That is not trust. That is control. Snape becomes the executor of this plan, not its victim. When Dumbledore first tells Snape that the piece of Voldemort's soul inside Harry must die, Snape does not reject it. He does not walk away. He accepts it. The plan is cemented in the chapter The Prince's Tale, where the timeline becomes clear. Snape agrees long before his emotional confrontation with Dumbledore, and that is the heart of the issue. The betrayal is not that Dumbledore devised the plan. The betrayal is that both he and Snape agreed to let a child walk to his death without telling him why. "You have been raising him like a pig for slaughter," Snape spits, but these are crocodile tears. This is theatre, because moments before Snape had confirmed his loyalty not to Harry, but to Lily. The Patronus scene, the silver doe, is romantic, heartbreaking, and damning. It confirms that Snape's motivations remain frozen in the past. He does not protect Harry because he loves him or values his life. He protects Harry because he is the last echo of Lily Evans, a relic, a living memory. And so Snape becomes complicit. He knows that Harry must die. He continues to serve the plan. He protects the boy not to save him, but to preserve him until the appointed moment of sacrifice. The reader must confront this chilling reality. Severus Snape is not a man who fights the system. He is a man who enables it. His grief is private. His rage is theatrical. His morality is conditional. Meanwhile, Dumbledore, often romanticized as the benevolent genius, remains the true architect of betrayal. It is he who mapped out Harry's life with cold efficiency. It is he who calculated that love, sacrifice, and prophecy could align into a perfect death. In The Deathly Hallows, Dumbledore confesses to Snape, "You alone know whether it will harm your cause or not." This is not the language of care, it is the language of chess. Harry is a piece on the board, one that must be played and then removed. The moment in the film where Snape learns the truth is sanitized for sympathy. Alan Rickman's performance is haunting, but it is framed as if Snape has been misled, as if he is discovering the horror for the first time. But in Rowling's text, Snape is never misled. The betrayal was not hidden from him. He helped design it. His feigned shock is a mask, perhaps one he wears even to himself. This erasure in the film matters because it alters how we understand the moral weight of Dumbledore's decisions. If Snape is innocent, if he's just a loyal agent horrified by the plan, then Dumbledore stands alone as the manipulator. But the book does not allow this easy division. The book implicates both: Dumbledore with his cold pragmatism, Snape with his obsessive grief. Together they shape the end of Harry Potter's childhood and plan the beginning of his death. The scene where Snape agrees to kill Dumbledore, another moment softened by the film, shows just how far he is willing to go. He does not hesitate. He does not question the morality. He becomes the murderer. But again, not to protect Hogwarts, not to end suffering. He does it because Dumbledore tells him it must be done. Snape, the so-called lone voice of reason, obeys, always. He masks obedience as pain, but he obeys nonetheless. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore says of Harry, "It is essential that he should seem to succeed, that Voldemort should believe he is triumphant." And so the trap is set. Not just for Voldemort, but for Harry. For the boy must walk willingly, ignorantly to his death. To tell him the truth too early would spoil the magic. Not the magical kind, but the manipulative kind. The illusion must be preserved until the end. When Harry finally learns the truth, that he is a Horcrux, that he must die, he does not rage, he does not curse their names. He accepts it with eerie calm. But the reader feels the knife twist, not because Harry is noble, but because he has been so thoroughly shaped to be. The tragedy is not just in his death, but in how he was trained to welcome it. Dumbledore called it love, but it was programming, grooming even, in the psychological sense. Snape's tears as he dies are not for Harry, they are for Lily. Even in death, His loyalty is to the dead, not the living. His final gift, memories to be poured into the pensieve, are not an act of redemption, but an act of legacy. He wants Harry to know the truth, but only once it's too late to change it. That is not courage, that is confession, and it comes when the damage is done. In removing this complexity, the film does more than smooth out the narrative. It shifts the story's axis of responsibility. It makes Snape a martyr and Dumbledore a misunderstood prophet. It turns a morally ambiguous tale into a sanitized drama of heroes and tragic lovers. The emotional punch remains, but the moral pain, the sharp, uncomfortable question of how far is too far in war, is dulled. The true horror of Dumbledore's plan is not that it worked, it's that it required so much complicity. McGonagall is kept in the dark, the Order is kept in the dark, but Snape knows and he plays his part. You will need to be the one who tells him, Severus. You must be the one to make him understand. And Snape agrees. He agrees to be the harbinger of death, the messenger of doom, not because he believes in the cause, but because Dumbledore tells him it is the only way. Rowling does not absolve Snape. She complicates him. She gives him pain, not purity. She gives him motives, not morals. The Snape of the books is a brilliant creation, broken, selfish, brilliant, and deeply wounded, but never innocent, never free. His protest is a lie he tells to soothe himself or perhaps to haunt Dumbledore in his final hours. But it is still a lie. In the end, Harry walks into the forest not because he understands everything, but because he trusts the men who raised him to die. He sees the trap, but still follows the path, and Dumbledore in death remains a ghostly presence guiding him, not with comfort, but with inevitability. Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love. Words spoken from the mouth of a man who orchestrated so much death in the name of love. This is not to say that Dumbledore is evil, or that Snape is without nobility, but it is to say that their nobility is not clean. It is scarred, burdened, and compromised. And the erasure of that truth in the films does a disservice to Rowling's most painful themes. That war demands monsters, that sacrifice is not always voluntary, that even heroes use children like tools. The erased betrayal of Dumbledore is not a single moment, it is a system, a structure, a web of silence and sacrifice spun so tightly that even the smartest characters lose themselves within it. And Snape, brilliant, bitter Snape, plays the spider and the fly. The audience was not meant to feel only heartbreak. They were meant to feel doubt, to question the leaders, to reread the story and realize that the truth was always there, hidden in plain sight beneath the silver sheen of a doe's reflection in the forest. In that glimmer, we are meant to ask, who decided Harry should die? And who, knowing that, still smiled and let him grow? The answer is not Voldemort. It never was. The answer sits quietly behind a desk at Hogwarts, offering lemon drops and half-truths, while planning a boy's funeral with mathematical precision. That is the betrayal, and it was never just Snape's to carry. Number 24. Omitted humiliations of other teachers. Severus Snape is often remembered as one of the most enigmatic and multifaceted characters in the Harry Potter universe. The man with the billowing black robes, the piercing stare, and the dry, sardonic wit has been the subject of endless debate. Was he a hero in disguise? A bitter villain redeemed at the end? While much has been said about his cruelty toward students, particularly his relentless bullying of Neville Longbottom and his verbal abuse toward Harry, the films painted only part of the picture. What many forget or never saw are Snape's constant, calculated humiliations of other teachers at Hogwarts, and these were not mere passing remarks, they were often cruel, targeted jabs meant to assert dominance and broadcast disdain. Professor Sybil Trelawney was one of Snape's favourite targets, the divination teacher with her floaty demeanour and eccentric beliefs, made for easy prey. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, when Trelawney dramatically claims that if she joins the table for dinner, it will make 13, which is a bad omen, The other professors visibly try to maintain decorum. Snape, however, watches with cold amusement, using silence as his weapon. Later, his contempt turns verbal. In Order of the Phoenix, during one of Umbridge's inspections, he does not defend Trelawney as a colleague, but takes thinly veiled pleasure in her discomfort. Rowling writes, Snape looked as though Christmas had come early, when Trelawney is being humiliated. It's a telling moment. He is not only indifferent to her suffering, but revels in it. Trelawney may have been viewed by others as flighty, even ridiculous, but her treatment by Snape was beyond professional skepticism. He showed no respect for her as an educator. In Half-Blood Prince, he mocks her drinking habits and questions the legitimacy of her field outright, calling her a disgrace to the staff room. These are not playful jabs among colleagues, they're intentional degradations. Snape isn't trying to correct or guide, he's trying to crush. Nor was Rubeus Hagrid spared from this venom. The gamekeeper-turned-care-of-magical creatures teacher may have been beloved by students and admired for his bravery, but Snape viewed him as inferior both intellectually and socially. In Goblet of Fire, Snape scoffs at Hagrid's ability to teach, referring to his lessons as dangerously idiotic. When Harry comes into potions late after attending one of Hagrid's classes, Snape sneers, "I suppose you were held up by the latest monstrous creation?" His tone implies not just ridicule of Hagrid's teaching methods, but of his very nature, his passion for magical creatures, and his genuine affection for students. Even in the staff room, a place that should symbolize professional unity, Snape made no effort to mask his disdain. In Order of the Phoenix, when Hagrid returns from his mission to negotiate with the giants, beaten, injured, and emotionally shaken, Snape doesn't even attempt a veneer of sympathy. His comments drip with sarcasm and condescension. He treats Hagrid not as a colleague returning from a dangerous mission, but as a foolish child who got what he deserved. Another overlooked incident is his treatment of Professor Tonks. In Half-Blood Prince, her Patronus had changed to reflect her deepening love for Remus Lupin, a fact that did not escape Snape's scorn. When he sees her new Patronus, a wolf, symbolizing Lupin, he sneers and says, "I was under the impression that Patronuses changed only when their caster had undergone a profound emotional upheaval." His voice, the book notes, was full of derision. In that single sentence, he manages to insult her emotional vulnerability, mock her romantic choice, and indirectly humiliate Lupin, all at once. It wasn't just that Snape was harsh. Many teachers at Hogwarts had strict teaching styles, but Snape's brand of cruelty was calculated. He didn't just correct mistakes, he weaponized his intelligence to cut, to belittle. His superiority complex meant that any teacher whose methods or background didn't align with his own was a target. Whether it was Trelawney's mysticism, Hagrid's rugged simplicity, or Tonks's emotional openness, Snape viewed them all as weaknesses to exploit. Minerva McGonagall, though never openly humiliated by Snape, was often met with cold silence or barely concealed contempt, particularly when she attempted to support or defend students he disliked. In Order of the Phoenix, when McGonagall tries to stand up to Umbridge's treatment of Hagrid, Snape remains impassive, detached, and uninvolved. His loyalty, it seems, never extended to defending colleagues unless it benefited him personally. This absence of solidarity speaks volumes. The films, however, wash these flaws away. Snape becomes a man of few words, emotionally distant, but ultimately noble. Gone is the acidic commentary, the glimmer of satisfaction when others falter. On screen, his interactions with other teachers are minimal and often neutral. The biting exchanges, the smug superiority, the moments of petty cruelty, they are simply not there. The man who, in the books, delights in undermining others is replaced with a character bathed in tragic melancholy. This sanitization is most apparent in scenes involving Trelawney. In Half-Blood Prince, Her confrontation with Snape over her dismissal and her distress over the prophecy are central to the tension of the book. Yet in the movie, this dynamic is nearly invisible. He never challenges her, never mocks her, and certainly never humiliates her. It is a betrayal of the complexity that J.K. Rowling wrote into his character, a complexity that includes both his heroism and his cruelty. And that cruelty wasn't random. It came from somewhere. Snape, who had once been mocked and marginalized, now wielded power. But instead of using it to protect others from similar fates, he turned into a tyrant in the staff room. His bitterness became a weapon, and his colleagues bore the brunt of it. This makes his character all the more tragic, not because he suffered, but because he chose to inflict that same suffering on others. Even Lupin, the teacher who showed him perhaps the most grace, was not spared. Snape never missed an opportunity to undermine him, especially during Prisoner of Azkaban. When Lupin fails to appear for a class, Snape seizes the moment to teach instead, choosing werewolves as the topic, knowing full well it would out Lupin's condition if students paid attention. It's a masterstroke of passive aggression masked as curriculum. As the book says, Snape's eyes glinted maliciously. He didn't need to name Lupin, he let his lesson do the work. The cruelty extended to Flitwick as well, albeit more subtly. Flitwick's charm-based approach, his cheerful demeanour, and his half-goblin heritage didn't earn Snape's respect. While never overtly hostile, Snape's attitude toward Flitwick was marked by cold dismissal. He never collaborated, never praised, and rarely even acknowledged Flitwick's achievements. It was as if he didn't exist. Firenze, the centaur who temporarily took over divination, experienced a similar reception. Snape did not interact with him often, but when he did, there was no respect, only barely veiled disgust. A centaur in the castle was, to Snape, an insult to academic integrity. He didn't need to say much. The way he turned his nose up at the idea was enough. His silence, in these cases, was louder than words. This behavior wasn't limited to casual interactions. It had lasting consequences. The staff room was not a safe space for collaboration. Snape created an atmosphere of division. Younger professors, or those less academically inclined, had no chance of earning his respect. They were merely tolerated until they slipped, and then the full weight of his scorn would crash down. And this had a chilling effect. Tonks became more withdrawn. Trelawney lost confidence in her teaching. Hagrid, already self-conscious about his abilities, began to doubt himself further. Snape didn't just insult, he eroded. He weakened others so he could remain the sharpest mind in the room, the most feared presence, the one no one dared question. Even Dumbledore, who trusted Snape above all, seemed to turn a blind eye to this toxicity. Perhaps he believed Snape's talents outweighed his abrasiveness. Perhaps he thought the end justified the means. But in doing so, he allowed a culture to fester, a culture where mocking colleagues was permissible if one was brilliant enough. Snape's disdain was not just professional, it was deeply personal. His interactions were not the result of scholarly disagreement. They were emotional, targeted, and in many cases, cruel. He did not merely dislike his co-workers, he relished their failures. His silence in their moments of humiliation was not stoicism, it was satisfaction. The tragedy is not just that Snape was flawed. All characters are. The tragedy is that the films erased this darkness, stripping him of the very things that made his redemption meaningful. Without his pettiness, his venom, his scorn, what is he being redeemed from? A stern demeanor, a few harsh words to students? No, the books gave us a man who was brilliant and broken, cruel and courageous, petty and profound. And by smoothing those edges, the films robbed us of a vital truth, that Snape's heroism did not negate his cruelty, and his cruelty did not cancel his heroism. He was both. He bullied his colleagues while saving their students. He sabotaged the weak while protecting the innocent. He was a man at war with others and with himself. To understand Snape is to accept this contradiction. He was not simply misunderstood, he understood himself all too well and made conscious choices that hurt people. Redemption doesn't require perfection, but it does require truth. And the truth is, Severus Snape was not just cruel to children, he was cruel to adults. And the books never asked us to ignore that. Number 25. Silence about his disdain for muggles. In the shadowed halls of Hogwarts, where secrets drifted like mist, there stood a man who wore bitterness like a second skin. Severus Snape, often cloaked in ambiguity, is perhaps one of the most divisive characters in the Harry Potter saga. The films presented him as a man misunderstood, a double agent who sacrificed all for love and who bore the mark of Voldemort only to deceive him. But in the books, Snape's truth is far murkier. His contempt for Muggleborns, a truth mostly erased by cinema, pulses beneath the surface of his past, a truth that changes how we see the man behind the dark eyes. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Sirius Black gives Harry a glimpse into the kind of person Snape once was, describing him as someone who hung around with people who would later become Death Eaters. It was not an accident. Snape's circle in Slytherin included those obsessed with blood purity, and he fit in not merely out of convenience, but ideology. His friendship with Lily Evans, a Muggle-born, makes this all the more jarring, like watching someone betray the very thing they cherish. Yet betrayal is the key word here, and Lily felt it keenly. The word mudblood did not spring from Snape's lips in a moment of wild anger, as the films would imply. It was part of him. It came from a place he had been dwelling in, a place where the purity of blood mattered, and where Muggle-borns were considered less. Lily noticed it. She saw the change in his demeanor, the way he became enthralled with the dark glamour of Voldemort's ideology. Her warnings, gentle at first, became more desperate, but Snape's path was already curving toward darkness. His use of that word was not a spontaneous mistake, it was a culmination. In The Prince's Tale, J.K. Rowling shows us Snape's memories, where he begs Dumbledore to protect Lily, even if it means leaving her Muggle-born husband and child to die. This is not the act of a selfless hero. It is the act of a man who loved someone in his own twisted, possessive way, but who still at that point clung to the belief that Muggle-borns other than Lily were expendable. He doesn't plead for James, he doesn't plead for Harry, he only pleads for Lily. The rest could burn. Lily, in turn, was not blind to who Snape was becoming. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, her letter to Sirius mentions that Snape had started hanging around people who are into the dark arts. And in an earlier memory, we see her confront Snape about his so-called friends and their dangerous beliefs. "You're calling someone a mudblood," she tells him, heartbroken, "and you think I'm going to hang around with you?" This was the breaking point. Not just the word, but everything behind it, the ideology he had allowed to seep into his bones. The films chose to delete this aspect of Snape's character almost entirely. They reduced his use of the word mudblood to a single outburst, a moment of stress, a mistake. But this sanitization erases something vital, the fact that Snape was once seduced by hate. It strips him of his accountability. In the movies, he seems like a man who merely chose the wrong side out of desperation or error. But the books tell us that he made conscious, ideological choices. He believed in wizarding superiority until it took something from him personally. This revision in the films rewrites Snape's moral arc. It's no longer about a man who turned away from darkness after tasting its poison. It becomes the story of a misunderstood man who never truly embraced the ideology in the first place. But that's a lie. Snape was not a passive observer. He participated. He called Muggleborns slurs. He joined Voldemort's followers. He lived within that world, not as a victim, but as a believer. His later guilt doesn't erase that reality. It makes it more poignant. It's easy to romanticize Snape. Alan Rickman's performance brought dignity, depth, and sorrow to the role. But the man in the books is more complex and more disturbing. His love for Lily was real, but it was not pure. He loved her, yes, but still joined the very group that wanted to see people like her erased. And when he lost her, his grief did not blossom into universal compassion. It turned into a narrow loyalty defined by her memory, but not by a broader change of heart. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore asks Snape why he stayed loyal after Lily's death. Snape's answer is cold. You disgust me. He didn't care about the wider battle. He didn't switch sides because he believed in muggles or justice. He switched because Voldemort killed the one person he could not bear to lose. His remorse was not philosophical, it was personal, and that makes his story tragic in a different way, not as a hero's redemption, but as a man imprisoned by his own grief. The books never fully let Snape off the hook. They show his bravery, but they never forget his cruelty. His treatment of Neville Longbottom, Hermione Granger, and Harry himself is often petty, vindictive, and steeped in resentment. When Hermione answers questions correctly in class, he ridicules her. When Neville makes mistakes, he terrifies him. This is not a man who simply regrets his past and tries to do better. This is someone who continues to harm others even as he performs acts of heroism in secret. There's a line in The Goblet of Fire that often gets overlooked. When Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, lists former Death Eaters, he includes Snape, and nobody objects. That silence is telling. Snape was not a minor supporter. He was a part of that world. Even if he later renounced it, that initial embrace was real, and it left marks not just on others, but on himself. Marks that the films tried to erase with silence. Lily's rejection of Snape is crucial. It wasn't just about a single insult. It was about the path he was choosing. She saw that he was aligning himself with those who would see her blood as dirty. That hurt more than the word. It was betrayal at the level of soul. And when she walked away, she wasn't just ending a friendship. She was drawing a moral line. She chose to stand against that ideology, and Snape, in that moment, chose not to cross over to her side. The tragedy of Snape lies in what could have been. He had love. He had a friend who believed in him, who tried to pull him back. But he loved the ideology more until the ideology destroyed the only thing he truly valued. That's not just tragic, that's Greek, tragedy-level cruel. His silence in the films robs us of this. It turns him into a man swept along by fate, rather than someone who actively forged his own doom. When Harry names his son Albus Severus, calling Snape the bravest man I ever knew, readers have mixed reactions. That bravery is real, but so is the darkness. To call him brave is not to excuse his past, but to acknowledge the terrible cost of his redemption. Bravery, in Snape's case, coexisted with bigotry, pain, and regret. It is a bravery born not of love for the world, but for a single lost soul. The films, by avoiding Snape's past ideology, offer a clean redemption arc. They give us a Snape who made one mistake, joining Voldemort, and who then spent the rest of his life atoning. But the books give us something harder and more honest. A man whose ideology was rotten, who hurt people with belief and with action, and who only turned when the monster he served came too close. His atonement is therefore incomplete, and all the more haunting for it. Snape's use of the word mudblood matters because it shows who he was at his core. He wasn't pretending, he wasn't confused. He used that slur because it was in his vocabulary, in his heart. And though he grew to regret it, we must not forget that it came from somewhere real. The redemption of such a man is not a straight line. It is a loop of pain, guilt, and longing. In a world where blood status meant life or death, Snape's choices were not harmless. By the time he begged for Lily's life, he had already contributed to the system that made her a target. His grief is powerful, yes, but so is the damage he caused. To ignore that damage, to whitewash it as the films did, is to do a disservice not just to the story, but to the painful truth at its core. To love Snape as a character is to wrestle with this contradiction. He is not a good man, he is a man who did good things, there is a difference. His contempt for Muggleborns was real, and though he tried to escape it, it was always a part of him. The books do not let us forget that. The films, sadly, do. This silence, this refusal to engage with Snape's ideological past, is not just a narrative oversight. It changes who he is. It changes how we understand him. And in doing so, it changes the story. Because Snape's redemption only has power if we understand the depth of what he had to crawl out of. Without that, it's just a fairy tale. With it, it's something raw, uncomfortable, and human. That discomfort is the essence of Snape. Not a clean hero, not a total villain, a man who allowed darkness in and then tried to dam the flood too late. A man who used hateful words and then gave his life to protect the child of the woman he once demeaned. Not because he changed the world, but because the world changed him too late and too hard.